Welcome to the Data Leadership Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony J. Algeman. Data is everywhere in our businesses, and it takes leadership to make the most of it. We bring you the people, stories, and lessons to help you become a data leader. And today, we welcome back Bob Seiner. Bob is the authority on non-invasive data governance, the publisher of TDAN.com, and the founder of KIK Consulting and Educational Services. He was my very first podcast guest, and I could think of no one better to talk with me about today's topic. He comes back all the time when I have a good topic to talk about. Today, we're going to be talking about buzzwords. And so, Bob, welcome home. You are my most frequent guest, and I always look forward to having a conversation with you.
It is an honor and a privilege to be with you and all of your viewers. Thank you, Anthony, for having me back. It's always a lot of fun. We could shoot the breeze about anything and everything and anything over. I mean, how long do you have, right? So yeah, let's talk about buzzwords and all this other stuff that's going on these days.
Yeah, well, and I mean, we often get sucked into like dissecting terminology and stuff in the different talks that we give, because that's a part of it, right? Where we have to understand the words that we're using, things like data governance or metadata management. And we've been through a lot of these things where we've seen, lately, especially, it seems like we see organizations and people that will just throw words around and not even necessarily know what they mean. And so that's where, like, and to be quite frank, like, we talk about everything, and it's not always on the show. You and I are always talking, and we're always thinking about different things that we could chat about or do presentations on. We have a presentation that we've been doing together on various occasions, debating data governance or data architecture and data leadership. And we like doing this because it helps us think about these terms and these subjects in different perspectives, right? And coming from different lights and recognizing that we don't own any of these terms. Like, nobody owns these terms, and people are going to use them in ways that make sense to them. And that leads in some cases to just some divergent usage from what the original intent is, or maybe the commonly accepted intent is. And I'll be quite honest in that there's been times where I've said, hey, I think this is what people normally mean by this. I don't like it. I'm going to use this a different way. At least I try to call that out. But a lot of times I think we hear these words, and I mean, we're not going to talk. So I'm going to start by saying what we're not going to talk about and then talk about it. But like, the classic example of a buzzword is like big data, right? Big data this, big data that. For a long time, it was everywhere, right? And it got to a point where it didn't even mean anything because everybody had their own definition of it. You saw the same thing with like business intelligence or other things like that. But there's some words that have been percolating more recently. Like, big data has been around for 15 plus years, right? Like, but some of these other terms have been a lot more recent. And I think that not only are they buzzwords, they're buzzwords that we may not even have well understood and accepted definitions for, because they don't necessarily appear in any of the texts or what have you. So that's my understanding of what we want to accomplish today. Bob, what would you add to that?
You know what, I think, so you're one of the perpetrators that are causing buzzwords to be misunderstood, because you say, if I don't like this definition, I'm going to use another definition for it. The problem with, I think the definition of a buzzword is, it's like a catchphrase for something, right? So that we can think of something out. And you know what? At some point, the term data governance wasn't being used.
Yeah.
I mean, there was stewardship really before there was governance, and governance became a buzzword. And there's still multiple definitions for governance. And big data was another one. And then people wanted to talk about small data. And so, there is no industry definition of these things. And, or should I say, the definition is in the eye of the beholder. So, there's a lot of terms being used these days that data fabric is a new one that's just being put out there. I have never seen a definition of data fabric. I don't know if it was determined by a vendor or a thought leader in the industry who used that term. But, I have an idea as to what I would think that data fabric would mean. is it something that's, have I seen organizations implementing data fabric?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't exactly know what that would entail. I think that's one of the things that bugs me the most,
Mm-hmm.
is that, I don't know when these terms become accepted without having a solid definition of what they mean.
Yeah. Well, in the case of data fabric, I'm not sure I know what people are even going for there, because I've talked about like the fabric of an organization, right? I think about it of a there's a richness and a context of the fabric of an organization, or the technical fabric of an organization, and there's a lot of intermingling, and it leads to some sort of tapestry like result, right? And hey, I'm the analogy master as far as I will come up with an analogy on the fly for anything, and people on my team will tell you sometimes they just don't work. And this whole fabric of an organization thing is a bit of a stretch even for me. I'm like, there's something to be said on it, but to then go data fabric, I mean, is that even like, is that a technology? Am I missing an entire technology out there? I don't know.
Well, I haven't heard of it in terms of a technology, but when I think of, and I think you nailed it when you said interwoven, or you mentioned that. That's what I think about is, you think about threads being interwoven in fabric, and that is, if you only have three threads going each direction, think of it as people, process, and technology, or something, whatever it is, whatever your 3 or 5 or 20 components are. And think in terms of people across, all of your different business areas. I think about metadata and data documentation across all of your business areas and all of your applications. So I don't think there's a clear definition of what those threads are that need to be interwoven. I'm not sure how much different it would be from a data strategy. Okay, we want to have a strategy. Our strategy is going to incorporate how this part of the business, how this part of the discipline of governing your data is being used in different ways. I have a framework that I use that is it's interweaving basically the core components of a successful governance program
Mm-hmm.
with the 5 different levels of perspective, executive, strategic, tactical, operational, and support, very much like John Zachman's framework for enterprise architecture. We talk about architecture and governance together. So, I guess maybe after this podcast, I'll be thinking of fabric in terms of my framework, and how we're interweaving these things with these things and pulling it together. That's my best guess at this point. It
Yeah.
is just a guess.
Yeah, but I think because it's flexible, right? Like, and there is no, we're not even clear what it's going for. I think that's what starts to make it become a buzzword. It's like those all those like consultancy terms. I once worked for a consulting organization, and they've stopped this practice since, but they used to do at their quarterly meetings, they used to have a contest amongst their consultants of who could say the most without saying anything, just using consulting speak. And it was a fun, like, tongue-in-cheek way of just poking fun at yourselves. And it gets me thinking, though, is that there's some times where, like, these terms start with meaning. They started from a good place, but then they kind of took a turn at some point to just be how people filled some time. Like, it becomes something that they just are like, I don't know what I'm talking about, so let's say data fabric, and they'll think I'm smart. And, like, maybe that's the way these things come around.
So can I take just like 15 seconds here, and I'm going to look right at your audience and say, I'm a consultant. I don't speak in consultant speak. So I think it would be a fun challenge to say, well, let's talk for a while without really saying anything. And you could fill it with buzzwords and sound really knowledgeable. But I don't think, people use them because they're memorable. They catch on. They become, the term data catalog started to be used by somebody. Data warehousing, we kind of know that Bill Inman was the person that came up with the father of data warehousing. And I think that's because he used the term earliest. You're not seeing too many fathers of the new of data fabric,
Right.
or of a father of big data, or any of the other terms. I think it's interesting because it makes our, I don't know where some of these buzzwords have come from, but I guess if you can get a picture of what they're saying, even without knowing a firm definition,
Mm-hmm.
there's some benefit to buzzwords. I mean, somebody reaches out to me and says, I need a data governance program, or I'm building a data governance program. They may not even have a definition for what data governance is. And at one point, data governance was a buzzword too. So there's benefit for us too.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes there's a cliche involved. Sometimes there's good intent. Sometimes it's nobody really knows, and things evolve, right? Like things that we talk about now. I think, like, while we used to talk about big data, now we're talking more about data literacy and some other buzzwords that we'll get to. But like, it's it's because of what's top of mind and trying to fit the language to concisely be relevant to these very complex and hairy topics, right? Like there's a lot that goes in to a lot of these things. I think data fabric misses the mark because it's too nebulous. It's too, like, I don't even know, right? So let's get into some other terms. We'll start with one, or we'll move on to one that is similar to data fabric, is that I'm not even sure we know what we're talking about, and that is data intelligence. And like, I don't even know where we're going with data intelligence, because that was one of the buzzwords that you had suggested, and I looked at them like, all right, but that's not one that I've really heard much in my comings and goings. But what kind of have you heard about data intelligence, and what are people saying or using data intelligence to mean, especially in contrast to other intelligences, like, I don't know, business intelligence or artificial intelligence? What the heck is data intelligence anyway?
Okay. Well, I don't have an answer for you, but I have heard the term at least 3 times. Well, I always have an answer for you. I don't, but I've heard the term 3 times this week from different, in different places, data intelligence. And the truth is that all 3 of those occurrences came from vendors.
Mm.
Okay, so they're looking for new terminology to catch on. And so there's business intelligence, there's, what's the difference between business intelligence and data intelligence? Except for, again, it's something that you can read into and you can define for yourself. Right. I mean, so being intelligent about the way that we manage our data, is that data intelligence? Is it the intelligence that we get out of it, the insights and the analytics that we're able to focus on? I think what the vendors are trying to say is, yes, it's all of those things. It's not only the discipline of what we need to do, but it's also the benefit and the value that comes out of it. I think that's what is being expressed in the term data intelligence. But like I said, I mean, you and I were thinking about, well, what buzzwords can we talk about today?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, that's got to be one, because I'm not really sure what that means. But you know what? So the benefit of it is, if somebody turns to one of these vendors and says, okay, you use the term data intelligence, what exactly does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
If they're humming and hawing with an answer versus saying, what I just said is, there's the intelligent management and governance of the data, and there's the intelligence that you get out of it. Having an answer that makes sense, it says, okay, so we understand what you mean by data intelligence. Mm-hmm. I don't think there is a description of anything else. Another thing, there's some of these things just drive me nuts. People want to add 2.0 to everything.
Oh man, yeah.
Right, 2.0, 3.0.
We're at data 4.0 now.
Right?
4.0 is where data is now.
No, we're at Chief Data Officer 4.0.
Yeah, well,
I know Gartner.
Oh, is that what it was? CDO 4.0. Yeah. That's
yeah. And I know the gentleman who put it together, and I've had good conversations with him about it. But it's and then there are other groups that call it next generation data governance. Okay, well, what is next generation data governance to handle the next generation of applications of data and analytics? I don't know, but it's not. But data governance doesn't need to have a 2.0, a 3.0, a 4.0, a next generation. If it's well defined and if you have a structured approach to doing it. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I just scratch my head, but people need to become memorable. Now, so one more thing. So I'm using data governance as an example. I really despise organization. Well, I don't despise the organizations, but I despise the use of the term master data governance or big data governance. As if the governing of big data or the governing of master data has to be different. Now, that being said, I talk all the time about non-invasive data governance. Okay, non-invasive data governance is not describing the type of data that is being governed. It's describing the approach and the how we're applying this to the organization. I had a client just this week describe artificial intelligence data governance, AI data governance. And I started thinking, okay, do we need another label for data governance? And in my head, no, we don't. We just need to call it what it is. And, when are we going to get? So when data governance 10.0 comes around, my company will start looking at it. It's not the way things work.
Yeah. I mean, so much of this just becomes marketing, right? Like it
is marketing.
Things like data intelligence really reminds me of this specifically. Is that I listened to another podcast and they get worked up because all the marketing out there, anything new is an immersive experience, immersive this and immersive that. And that's what this data intelligence reminds me of. It's like data's not intelligent. Data's ones and zeros sitting in a system somewhere. People are intelligent. And that's where, like, if you're going to be intelligent about data, that's fine. That's data literacy. But data literacy is, again, we had to snazzy it all up and make it's not about like literacy like that. I mean, it's creative. I'll give whoever first said the data literacy one, I think is the one that really I'm impressed by because that took some thought. But now, again, that it's understanding the data and putting data to use. So I think there's value in that. At least as we get into like data literacy, at least there's value in that. Like we can agree, hey, is having a workforce that understands how to use data to do things better, is that valuable? Yes, great. Let's call that data literacy and teach people to read. You think that might be a little condescending to people? Nah, let's just make them do it anyway. Like so
they're illiterate now. They're illiterate. We're trying to make them literate. Right?
Nothing motivates people more than making fun of them to their face, right? Like that's what data literacy is implying. Like you are not only do you stand to benefit and have something to gain from all of this, but we're saying that you are so incompetent that you're completely unable to work with data at all today. And it's up to us to solve this for you, dumb person. It bothers me because we act like that. And then people wonder why they don't want to talk to the data governance people or the data people, because they're like, oh, let us bestow upon you the wisdom of the data, as if you don't have other things to do. Like, let's think about how can we serve people that are already busy, that already have jobs. How can we give them some better capability to execute on those jobs? To me, it's not about forcing people to learn how to read the data. It's about how do we help to amplify people's capabilities through data-driven capabilities, through data-driven tooling and platforms and you name it. But it is not because people have a deficiency. It's because there's an opportunity. And data literacy bothers me as a buzzword because it kind of implies this missing link that people should have already learned that data stuff by now, and now we have to drag them kicking and screaming into a data-driven world. Now, to be fair, we're recording this on a Friday, and I have zero filter today, but that really is.
So Anthony, I was going to tell you, I was going to try to jump through the screen there for a moment because I was to say, okay, calm down, my brother, calm down, because I am not certain that data literacy is demeaning anybody, or I don't think that the intention is to demean. In fact, I haven't really talked to anybody about what the term data literacy, data, I mean, actually, when that term first came out, I didn't like the term either.
Mhm.
But after it just becomes part of it becomes part of the fabric of what we are doing, right? And
Nice.
people are using the term literacy, and if you have a good definition for what it means, yeah, it can mean getting people even to understand the value that quality data brings to the organization,
Mhm.
and what they can do that they couldn't do before, or what they can do quicker or more efficiently that they couldn't do. So being data literate, I can understand, but data, yeah, I was going to tell you to calm down because I just don't see as many negative connotations that come with it. It's not like you're telling people that they're illiterate. You're saying we're going to help them to better understand the value of data, the data that's available to them, the understanding of the data. And I'm sorry, I'm having more of a passive day than you, Anthony. So,
No, I'm worked up,
but
but that's okay.
that's exactly the point of what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah,
Is the buzzwords, right? They're there to get a response from you.
exactly. Well,
And
data literacy.
okay.
So like I hear you about it, and I'm amplifying my reaction for effect, right? Like I do that. But I mean, it is, I think, something that we want to be thoughtful about, because even though I agree with you, the intent of data literacy is that it's not supposed to be punitive. It's not supposed to say, oh, our non-data literate folks are illiterate folks. Like that's not the intent. The problem though is that we know that because we've experienced all of this in many different organizations or what have you. But a person who really doesn't have that exposure might look at the word for what it is. And if I'm used to literacy meaning literate or illiterate in a language context, I might interpret that as a negative, even though no one intends that. And this is something that I talk a lot about in data leadership, is that maybe we mean well, maybe we intend to create value, but the consequences of our actions are not exactly what we intend every time. Sometimes there's some challenges that we have, and you know this, Bob, that in the data space, in the data governance world, and all of these related topics, we have a marketing problem. We often find it difficult to get people on board, and it's due to a number of things, but we throw around big words a lot. And we have a value proposition that is shaky at best because we have very clear expectations and costs associated with the work of things like data governance. But the payoff happens in this long-term view and in these organizational capabilities that are really hard to put your finger on. And it's hard to motivate these things. And if we're inadvertently condescending on top of it, that's something that we want to be aware of. So that's why I'm poking at data literacy. It's about saying semantically, can we poke holes, or should we be thinking about some of these buzzwords a little bit differently than maybe we are, just because we hear it a lot in our data circles?
Well, because if they were well thought out and there was a real plan behind them, I don't think they'd be buzzwords. I think they would be, they would actually be stitched into what we do. In fact, I'm doing a webinar. I do my monthly webinar with Dataversity. Next week, I'm going to be doing a webinar with them. Probably will be, it will take place before this podcast is released, I'm sure, but it's on data governance and information governance. Okay. And is there a difference between data governance and information governance? And so, I've defined I've defined the governing part of it, but the data or the information or the master data or the metadata or the AI data governance or the BI data governance, or, what I'm going to talk about in my webinar is, maybe we're not sending a condescending message in that way, but are we sending a message by calling it BI data governance? Mm-hmm. And is it the message that we really want to be sending to the organization? Are we governing just BI data? Are we governing just metadata? So, I talk a little bit about when you're comparing and contrasting data governance and information governance, it's all around how you're defining data or how you're defining information, in your organization. So there's labels, and I started using the term, we're going to label data governance as this kind of data governance or that kind of data governance. And I think that we need to be very careful with the message that we're sending to the organization. If we're going to call it master data governance, does that mean that the data that's not considered master data is being governed or is not being governed? Or, I'm just saying that's an example of words mean a lot, right? We need to be very careful with the words that we use. If the buzzwords, again, like I said, buzzwords aren't always well thought out at the beginning. There's somebody just uses this terminology and it catches on. I think that we just have to be very careful as to the words that we use, respect our audience, put ourselves in our audience's shoes to see what they would expect it to be talked to that way or to have something explained to them that way.
I can't help but feeling like you're just giving me podcast hosting advice. Like you're like, listen to your, don't alienate your audience. Use the words carefully. I'm like, man, how bad did I lay into data literacy? No, but I think it's good advice, right?
It's a pet peeve. It's a pet peeve of mine. The different labels people give to governance, and I didn't want you to get to the point where you were committing Harry Carey over the term data literacy. So that's why I was going to jump through the screen. But it is easy to get passionate about these types of things. The most important thing, and no, I'm not giving you advice for your podcast because you've done many and I've only done, well, how many times have I been on yours? I've done that maybe plus a few. Yeah. But we always should be careful as to the words that we use and because we may not be implying the things that we want, that we are intending to imply. And, thus buzzwords can be pretty dangerous.
Well, and I'll amplify that point a little bit because I think that as our, world gets smaller in a lot of ways. And I think that even if we think about like the pandemic with remote work or what have you, many of us find ourselves in geographically dispersed teams these days and have, global footprints to our data organizations and our enterprises. And these things all get exponentially more difficult as we broaden that cultural language, comfort, technical, level of experience. Like there's so many differences in the kinds of folks that still need to have some connection through data that it gets very dangerous if we start throwing words around, assuming everybody is like ourselves. Like I will say that, and it's good to be careful. And then I will also say, I am the first person in line to make ridiculous mistakes, apologize for it, and learn quickly. So I think there's room for both, right? Where if you can push forward from a good place with a recognition that you don't know what you're talking about, but you are committed to learning and figuring it out. To me, that's more important in many ways than the words that we choose. If I can choose a bunch of bad words and quickly realize which words are the good words and which words are the bad words, I'm going to get to a better place faster. But if I come at it saying, nope, I got the words, you need to conform to my words, that makes it a much more difficult place potentially. And there's some times when that's necessary. And this is where it's like, it's all shades of gray. It's all like trade-offs and give and take. But what's going to actually accomplish the most good? What's going to create the most value? Is there a shortcut to creating value quicker by using some buzzwords? Sometimes there probably is. Sometimes if you start, saying things like data literacy, people can orient to that quickly, be relatively in alignment with what you're talking about, and may be able to shortcut some of the other conversation that may be necessary to move something forward. There's benefit in that, right? So the buzzwords may not be wholly without value. They just come with some danger to them. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, I think that buzzwords are used to get people to sit up and take notice. If it gets them to sit forward in their chair and to ask a question as to what do you mean by that, and it gives you the opportunity to explain to them what you mean by that or what is meant by that, that's a good thing. I think that it can be dangerous. I think it can be very dangerous. And I guess that's the whole dilemma about buzzwords, not just in our industry, but in any industry, or just in language in general. It's it is a marketing thing. I mean, a lot of these terms come out of marketing techniques and people that are very skilled in marketing. But if they get you so I use the term non-invasive for data governance because I want people to ask, what the heck do you mean by non-invasive data governance? There's no such thing. You can't do it that way. Well, yes, you can. Let me tell you how. It gets them to sit forward in their chair and to engage you, look you in the eye, and ask you questions about it. But at the same time, if they don't have that opportunity to have that conversation with you, their understanding is going to be based on their perspective from life, right? So again, if it could have a very negative effect too. So it can be dangerous, but if it gets people's attention and gets them asking questions and gives you the opportunity to explain yourself, then let's buzz away.
It's an interesting thought, and because I've become, especially with we're currently in this state with coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic of many organizations are starting to return to the office or going to some sort of hybrid, and people are getting out of their shells. They're starting to go to restaurants again. They're starting to do activities again, and that's been increasing over the last couple months, and hopefully will continue to increase. And I think a lot about psychological safety. I think a lot about how do we provide the right environments for our people to gain the most success. How do we give them the right ways of working? How do we give them the right tooling? How do we give them the right collaboration frameworks? How do we give them the right support and resources and ability to amplify what they're doing through the right kinds of software and all of these things? And the right kind of mission, right? How do we figure this stuff out together and allow people and help people regain in an environment that's evolving so quickly? How do we help them gain a comfort and confidence that it's going to be okay when over the past year plus everything's not been okay? And there is, I think, an inherent, like, we're all a little bit rattled. I think we're all a little bit off kilter, especially the more change that happens. I think that's common no matter what we're talking about, right?
The way we get through that is by extensive use of buzzwords. No.
That's it. Problem solved.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, things. It's been a very interesting year, almost year and a half, and I don't think there's a single answer to say how can we smooth this over. The description, the common. We talk about common language in other terms in data management, but common language even in how we describe our trade and the things that we get involved in. I don't know. I don't know if there's an answer to help people to get past that. But I think organizations, what I have seen in the last year is that for some reason, data strategies are on a comeback if they were ever here in the first place. But more and more organizations have had this opportunity now during this away time, or should I say downtime? But it really hasn't been down or away. It's maybe physically away, but not away, for a long time. I think that, if we can get people on, whatever we need to do to get people on the same page, there is an opportunity right now. I think you and I did a podcast on the term opportunity, right? We talked about how important to take advantage of these opportunities. We have an opportunity now that there is starting to become more and more of a hunger for how organizations are managing their data and information. People have settled in now to being away from the office, and now they're being brought back into the office or part. So there's going to be another transition period that we're going through here. So if we can take advantage of that, or find a way to take advantage of it, because companies are spending lots of money on blending systems together, or upgrading to a new ERP or CRM package, or integrating all these acquisitions data into there. I mean, there is opportunity right now. Just because we've gone through COVID in the last 16 months doesn't mean that has slowed down. I mean, it may be, I haven't looked at the statistics around that. I think it's sped up, maybe. I don't have statistics to say that more or less acquisitions have taken place, but it might make sense to think maybe there were more. And now there's more of an opportunity to integrate your data and bring it in. So I guess basically what I'm saying is, buzzwords can help to get people to sit up and take notice. We need to we need to utilize this opportunity that we have right now to get a common understanding between business people and technical people, and the terminology and the language that we use. Buzzwords help us to get there. They don't solve the problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you're kind of like the language matters, right? How we communicate with each other and get to an understanding that can be shared, and an alignment that can, motivate us to keep pulling in the same direction. Those are the things that are really important. And can the buzzwords help? Yes, but they have a certain risk to them. And what I think that risk is, because I don't think we've talked exactly about what the risk is that the buzzwords can make it feel like we have alignment, but under the surface, even though we agree data literacy, under the surface, our understanding of what that means and the actions required to achieve that may vary greatly. And while we'd like to say, hey, we're using this label, we're pulling in the same direction, that may not necessarily be true. And it's at that detail level that things really need to line up. And that's true. Like if you put your data hat on, right, you go to do some data warehousing and dimensional modeling and stuff, you can't add grains that are different. You have to think about what is our lowest common denominator? What is the truth that unites us at the detail level? Because then you can bubble it up. Then you can sum it together. But if you're adding apples and oranges, it's not going to be the same thing. And I think from a linguistic perspective, the buzzwords make it more risky that can happen and cause us more problems down the road. And that's usually the problem. Like if you can solve a problem now versus a year from now, chances are it's going to cost you less today to solve that problem than it will a year from now.
Yeah, I was thinking what would be a great name for this podcast, and I wrote down "Get rid of buzzwords" or "Buzz away."
Use that.
As do we I think this is a great conversation. I don't think we're going to solve any of the world's problems. Although if it was just that easy of you and I having a conversation, we'd be talking a lot more, right?
Yeah.
To solve the world's problems. But, I think that there's been some great perspective given in here in this conversation about the risk of using words that people don't completely understand, how important it is to be careful as to the language that we use. I knew we weren't going to solve. We never solve anything, Anthony. You and I, we have fun doing it, and we hope that it's interesting for other people. But I'd love to hear what other people think about what buzzwords mean, and the impact that they're having on them as well. So, yeah.
Rarely do we get answers on this podcast. We often, I think it's about asking good questions. It's about having, a moment outside of the chaos of our everyday. Everybody is just inundated with stuff, right? All day long. And if you can listen to this podcast and listen to our conversation and just think a little bit differently about something and ask some new questions and just consider things from a slightly different perspective, we've achieved our goal. Like we don't have the answers for you, but hopefully maybe we can pose some new questions that help illuminate some topics in a little bit of a different way. That's really what we're going for here. And that's where yeah. I mean, and that's
Get
why
people
I'll play devil's advocate on things, and I'll push things even if I don't agree with them, just because I want to take a moment and consider an opposing viewpoint or a divergent viewpoint from what I would assume is normally correct. Plus, it's not that exciting if I just keep regurgitating everything I think I know. I'd much rather challenge that, even ridiculously, like we mentioned. I'd like to ridiculously be wrong and then bring it back in. Okay, tested that border. That's definitely not right. Let's bring it back. But that's the kind of thing that I think with data is always, it needs to be ever present in how are we inquisitive? How are we developing our hypotheses? How are we finding new ways to improve what we do as a result of looking at the data? And whatever words that takes, then do those words. Like I don't all of this stuff is just like picking a section of the road. It's like, you never drive on the expressway. You're driving on an expressway and you go past that sign that says the next mile is kept clean by the Kiwanis Club or whatever club it is, right? We're going to clean this next mile. I don't know much, but I do know that for the next mile, I am hypercritical of how much garbage and debris I see on the side of the road. And I never pay attention to it otherwise. But then when I'm going down that mile, I'm like, all right, Kiwanis, how good are you at cleaning this section of the road? And sometimes they're really good. And sometimes they're like, whoa, you guys haven't been out here in a while. So it's that kind of thing where we're picking a mile. Each of these podcast episodes, we pick a mile of our expressway, of our journey, and say, let's look at this mile. Let's think about this.
Great analogy.
The Friday analogies on the fly, man. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I think we got a winner there, but it's how we think about something a little bit more critically for a moment, and then go back to the normal grind, the normal day-to-day. And that's really, for anybody who's new to the podcast, we've gotten a lot of growth in listenership and viewers on YouTube lately. And I really hope that you understand that's the point of all of this, is it's not to give you the answers, but it's to help you consider more questions and help you navigate your journey in the best way you can. And I think that's one of the reasons that we always love having Bob on the show, and why Bob and I enjoy having these conversations, is that it gives us a moment to think that way too, to consider these things. And we didn't have all the answers written out, and figured out. We talk through some of this stuff and think about it, and that's the fun part, and you get to join us for some of that conversation. So hopefully that can be valuable to you all as well. We certainly enjoy it. Hopefully you find some value in it too.
Well, and so you and I are already talking about, well, what are we going to talk about in the next podcast? What's the next mile that we're going to put our label up and have people be more observant of what trash we throw and what is trash is being thrown at them. This has been a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun. I look forward to the next time. We've got some beauties of topics that we can talk about, but this one was certainly fun.
Yeah. So, and sad to say, but we are definitely out of time at this point. So Bob, once again, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing your thoughts and your time with us. And hopefully we'll have you back on again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you all for watching or listening today. You'll find more information in the show notes. Please remember to follow Data Leadership Lessons on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy the show, please rate and review and tell others about us. Learn more about data leadership with my book at dataleadershipbook.com and use promo code ALGMANDL at the Dataversity Online Training Center for 20% off your first purchase. Stay safe during these unusual times and go make an impact.